comments or concerns. Right. To read through when I went back to the car, did we have one of just says, yeah, we really only had one comment? We only had one public comment? Okay. Yeah, I guess we'll go with that.
Yes, yeah, and then, yeah, so I think if we have like a category for meetings,
Right.
I took the items that we discussed and got those.
Right, and so, and I'll send her what I have from the meeting, and then between you and I, we'll just kind of find a way to do that, so that we're just regularly, maybe do the same thing, we get the same people or whatever, something we're all in council, but just so that we're collecting the information in the same way, kind of categorizing, kind of getting a universally what's important.
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please.
Commissioner Wilson? Commissioner Hall? Here. Commissioner Linton?
Here?
Commissioner Hogan?
Here.
Chairman O'Brien?
Here. Okay, the first item would be any public comments for any items not on tonight's agenda. Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the next. Next will be adoption of the agenda. And let's see, do we have an additional item to add to the agenda here?
No, that's just
informational. Okay, fine, thank you. So do we have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And, motion passed. The agenda has been accepted. Public comment on the consent agenda. Consent agenda is project status update, public works project update, minutes of August 27th. So any public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, second.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, now we're going to the business items. There are no action items tonight. So the business item is the general plan update for 2020 land use element presentation.
Take a moment and introduce Christy Consolini from Hauge Brewick and Associates, land use environmental planner.
Hi, I'm Christy Consolini. I work with Andy, who gave the presentation last time. And so tonight, last time we gave an overview of the general plan and the process. And tonight we'll focus a little bit on one of those elements in the general plan. But I do want to give a little bit of an overview of the process. So making decisions, we want participation. So we want to hear what everyone has to say and respect the perspectives in an objective process. So it's good to hear a wide variety of input from the community. Someone may have a concern or idea that's not expressed or thought about before, and it's important to look at those. Some of the ideas may seem a bit of a stretch at first, but they can have a considerable merit and may become an integral part of the update process. Be informed. We want to provide and be provided with sufficient and accurate information. This means that details matter, and having those details can lead to more robust decision making. And evaluate. We want to base our decisions on full consideration of sufficient and accurate information. So considering all sides of an issue and focusing on facts. The general plan process is listed up on the board. Right now we're in the consistency evaluation and information gathering phase, which will take place this fall and winter. And then we'll go through the next phases, which is agency and community input leading to a council policy direction, technical studies, draft documents, and the draft EIR and final EIR. So we want your feedback on what works and what doesn't, where you have encountered inconsistencies between the general plan and other regulatory documents or guidance, and what is missing in the general plan that you want to see included so that when you are referring to the general plan, there is direction and it's very clear. At the same time, we'll be combing through the general plan to see where we find inconsistencies or where information described has changed. For example, in the land use element, there's a section that lists the changes that are in the 2001 general plan. That will, of course, need to be updated because that has been adopted and is the current general plan. So we also want to look at where the state now requires specific topics to be addressed, or it directs how those topics should be addressed. For example, state laws have changed regarding accessory dwelling units or second units, and there's also requirements for addressing greenhouse gases. So let's talk about the required elements of a general plan. The general plan requirements are established in California Government Code, and the State Office of Planning and Research has guidelines that we can use to ensure that we are including all those contents. There are 9 required elements. Those are land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, safety, environmental justice, and air quality. These elements can be combined as long as they are adequately addressed. So, for example, noise and safety are combined in the Loomis General Plan. So, the Loomis General Plan has 6 separate elements that combine some of those topics, as I just discussed. So, it consists of the land use and community development element, which includes the downtown plan, parks and recreation, and economic development. There's a circulation element that was updated in 2016, the housing element that was updated in 2014, public services, facilities, and finance element, a conservation of resources element that includes natural resources and open space, including air quality and cultural resources. And there is a public health and safety element with safety and noise included. Since the 2001 general plan, state laws required some new topics to be addressed, and these will need to be incorporated during this update. So this includes environmental justice, which is sometimes combined with other elements, or it may strongly reference policies from those other elements. Greenhouse gases, vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and the regional housing needs allocation. The upcoming regional housing needs allocation for Loomis is tentatively over 100 units for affordable or for low income and very low income affordable units. So that's in addition to the 129 units already allocated. So in that case, the land use assessment will need to look at the land use diagram and determine how this added allocation is addressed, where are we planning to put those units. And so expansion of existing elements to meet the general plan guidelines is also another item we'll want to look at and to determine in this phase. Some additional details or policies may be needed to ensure that required topics are adequately addressed per the current requirements. So the elements of the general plan are often interrelated. The state requires the general plan to address relevant statutory issues. Elements will reflect the characteristics of the town. So example of topics that don't need to be addressed are forest and timber resources and coastal resources, because Loomis is not located on the coastline and doesn't have a forestry or timber operation that would need to be reflected in the general plan. And then elements and issues must be integrated with elements containing interrelated content. So, for example, flooding will be addressed in the land use element, the housing element, the conservation element, and safety element, because flooding affects all different aspects of the town. So you have housing, you have the natural resource of the waterway that has potential flooding, you have safety. So the elements and issues must be internally consistent. So we don't want to have something in one element that conflicts, a policy that conflicts in another element. So we want to make sure that when we're looking through this and we're updating, we are consistent throughout each of the elements where there is the interrelation between the two. So the general plan is the highest level of town policy. So you have the general plan, and below that, master plans, area plans, and specific plans, then the municipal code, and then guidelines and standards, such as design guidelines. Land use element, purpose, and opportunities. Fundamental decisions begin with the land use element. It frames what uses are allowed and where they are located. The purpose is to promote thoughtful, equitable, and accessible distribution of land uses. So you don't want to have land uses randomly assigned so that a major commercial center, say next to an agricultural residential area, for example. So poor distribution can cause impacts in other areas. You can have a circulation impact or infrastructure impact by poor planning and poor distribution. And through this process, we're not looking to rearrange the entire town. We're just looking at the town as it is and looking at little areas where we need to maybe address, for example, the RENA allocation, or things that you find through your planning process where you might want to include areas for a certain use. The element can be used as a tool to improve public health, reduce infrastructure costs, enhance the local economy, and address long-term issues. And it can help resolve conflicts or identify trade-offs. So, for example, you have a policy on clustering development in the land use element. So while that can increase the concentration or intensity of use on a parcel or parcels, it also has the potential to create open space on that parcel and preserve natural features or an aspect of the parcel that reflects the town character, for example. So required content. The land use element needs to designate the general distribution, general location, and general extent of uses, and specifically the requirement for that under the government code is to include housing, business, and industry, open space, including watersheds, natural resources, and recreation facilities and opportunities, educational facilities, public buildings and grounds, future solid and liquid waste facilities, greenways, and areas subject to flooding. And it needs to include population density and building intensity for these uses. And these are all items that are listed in California Government Code Section 65302. So they're listed out very clearly. And for each of these, we need to discuss density and intensity for these uses. So what does density and intensity mean? We need to accommodate Loomis's share of the regional housing need. And population density is defined as the numbers of people in a given area, not the dwelling units, but the number of people per acre. So higher density areas are going to have more people per acre, and low density areas are going to have fewer people per acre. Building intensity is the dwelling units per acre or the floor area ratio or lot coverage or lot size or combination of these. So it can include provisions for flexibility such as density bonuses, cluster zoning, planned unit developments, but it doesn't need to necessarily include each of those items. Sorry. So build-out analysis, that also needs to be included, and it should show a realistic development capacity where the analysis identifies vacant land, constrained land, land required for public services, potential for infill, and land for public services. We want to estimate a development capacity, and that's typically categorized by the land use designation. So when we talked about population density or building intensity, that is going to support that analysis for the build-out. The land use diagram is also statutorily required, and it should designate the proposed general distribution of land by the land use designation and the location and extent of those uses. It can also set minimum and maximum density standards. Specific areas, districts, neighborhoods, or corridors can be identified on the diagram in addition to the land use designations. So if you have, say, a desire to put the downtown district in shown on the map, you can add that, for example, or if a community has specific neighborhoods that they have named in their community, those can be added to the map, but they're not required. And often I find that too much information can be too much information, and it's hard to navigate through that, so sometimes separate mapping is more worthwhile. Here's your land use diagram. So this shows each of the land uses in Loomis, and by parcel, so you can, when a project comes up, you can look at that map and find that parcel and know exactly what that designation is. And you'll see there's also special areas marked off on that map, which are described in the general plan. So potential focus areas on the land use diagram. The referendum properties, Turtle Island, the regional housing needs allocation sites, those are all areas where we might want to take a second look at the land use diagram and see how it's working, or what changes we might want to see, or what do we want to keep. So additional areas may be identified during this phase and the next phase when we talk with the agencies and community input. So these are all things to consider during the update. The land use element is somewhat the mother of all the other elements because it identifies where some of the policies and other elements are applied, and it provides an overall guide to the town's layout, the town's function. So it's a critical thing to look over that diagram and the land use element to make sure it's addressing things that you want to see addressed. How to participate. There are comment forms that are available. They can be mailed or dropped off at Town Hall. Comments can be emailed to the email address on the board. You can set up a meeting with planning staff by appointment and also attend workshops and hearings. So this was just a presentation on the land use element. There are the other elements that were discussed that I'm not talking about tonight because this is a big one. But they will also be reviewed. So it's not just a land use update for the general plan, it's a full update of the general plan. And it's not an overhaul of the general plan. There's things that work in the general plan, and we want to keep those things that work. But we also want to make sure that we are meeting state law. And we are crossing our T's and dotting our I's and making sure we've got everything covered. And that's the purpose of that update. Questions?
I have one question. People that own land in this town, when we do these kind of things and change things,
Yeah.
how does it affect them when they bought the property, thinking, example, that they think it's commercial when they bought it, but then it ends up not being commercial after you make these changes? How does it affect them?
So that's a key item. So when you make those changes to the land use, it can affect the value of the property.
Yes.
And so, those particular parcel owners will definitely need to be notified and a discussion opened up with them. Some want the change, some don't.
Right.
So that's part of the process.
So it goes to the new, whatever it ends up being, that's what it is for them.
Well, it depends on that discussion. So we might look at that and think, well, maybe that's not the best idea for that parcel. Maybe it needs to stay as it is. But there are times when it does change, and, it becomes a case of, are we losing any land value? Are we, staying the same? Because you can have, say, residential high density versus commercial. It's not as big of a difference between a rural residential type designation versus commercial or industrial, for example. That's a big change. And so we want to have that discussion with the landowner before those decisions are solidified.
I had a question on the build-out analysis, and you said it needs to be realistic. And I'm
Yes.
aware that the current general plan, the build-out analysis for 2020 was not really realistic. It was not taking into effect what Loomis is really like, and it was a number that was designated to us by SACOG, period. We had nothing to say about it. So how does that work? For instance, just because we have some larger parcels that are splittable doesn't mean that everybody is going to rush to split it.
Right.
And just because we have some places that could be a potential subdivision of, typically subdivisions here are 8 or less. Minor land divisions are more common at 2 or 3 parcels. But not everybody's in a big rush to do that. More often it seems that it's when a family member is getting older and wants to divide it to put in place for their kids. But to simply say, okay, you've got X number of acres at 4.6, therefore you're going to get this number of lots out of it, and that kind of thing doesn't really reflect what happens in Loomis, nor does it, in my opinion, necessarily consider that you've also got things like, if you do develop it, you've got roadways and infrastructure that you have to take out of that.
Yes.
If you've got wetlands, you're not really going to get the same number. So how do you come up with something that's realistic for the way things happen in Loomis, as well as the usual kinds of infrastructure, wetlands, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a little easier to plan for things like infrastructure. So you would just take a percentage of, say, that total area, and what you think, say 25% would go to roads and infrastructure of that parcel, or well, let me back that up. There's 2 ways of looking at this. So you can look at it at a parcel by parcel basis, which is, sometimes it gets you a lower number and sometimes it doesn't. And it's impossible to look at how many wetlands are on each site, but you can kind of look at the parcels and make an estimate. So the other way is also just to group all of the acres of a certain land use designation together. And that gives you a little broader number. It's a little less accurate sometimes, but not necessarily by a lot. And so using either of those methods, you can calculate a percent that like I said, 20 to 25%, where that land won't be developed with a unit or a commercial facility. It will be used for setbacks and infrastructure and roads and things of that nature. So you make a calculation and take a percentage of that, and based on the population per that land use designation, or the minimum unit or lot size, or however you choose to calculate that. There's different ways. But that's how you can develop an estimate. So, and these are just estimates. And I know for a lot of communities, these general plans are 20 years long. You're looking into the future 20 years. And as we know, back in 2008, we had a recession, and a lot of development went down, and people weren't building or changing or doing much of anything. And so those numbers for growth became inaccurate for a period. And the rate was not quite what the state had said it would be. So these are projections. They're looking at a broad sense. It's not necessarily, this is exactly where we're going to be in 20 years, but this is the broad build-out of the community. We can also look at a rate that's more accurate for what we know of, what we've experienced in Loomis to be, and apply that. So we don't just have to have one single rate and that's it, and we can show different rates and different build-out projections. One that's a broad one that is realistic based on what the current growth rate is or what we expect the growth rate to be, despite what the state might say the growth rate might be. So there's different ways to look at it.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be, we have this many usable acres at this much density, therefore, or does the state basically require us to do that?
Well, it's good to look at that, because that's kind of like the big giant picture if all of a sudden everything were to be developed, which won't happen in the next 20 years, obviously.
Right, that's my concern. It's not going to happen in the next 20 years.
It's not going to happen in 20 years.
And there's not a big push in Loomis because people come here to get away from suburban sprawl.
Right.
And they don't want, they're not interested in having a whole lot of development, subdivision density.
Right.
Around, as far as everybody divide up the
And
maximum they can do it.
It doesn't mean that's as far as you have to take it. It's just a number that gives you an idea of, for example, for the regional housing needs allocation, how many high-density acres do we have? So can we meet that allocation? So it's looking at a broad picture of, can we meet these requirements? It doesn't mean you have to build out to exactly the highest density possible for every project.
How do you accomplish the minimum density? If somebody has some property and they want a subdivision, are they obligated to have a minimum number of houses they put in there?
Sometimes, yes. So that can be a policy. You can have something where, for example, I think on the there is a very high-density land use designation where the minimum needs to be 20 that's applied to Area 2. So you have a minimum that you need to have so that you can reach that it's meant for the regional housing needs allocation. So you can apply that. You don't have to, but you can include those in there if you want to make sure there is a minimum.
So that's optional.
It's an option. And so other things such as your minimum lot sizes, which is more of a zoning issue than a land use element issue, but those are things that can guide how big or how small your lots need to be or how much you can subdivide a lot.
With the new elements like the environmental justice and the ones that try to address the greenhouse gases with the vehicle miles traveled, will we have more information about, what specifically that is?
Yes, yeah. So as we go through, we will provide a report that shows what needs to be added per those state laws. So what specifically is missing right now, so that we can just add those in to the respective elements. So for example, greenhouse gases is going to likely end up in the conservation element because it's related to conservation of our resources. But there's a little bit of an overlap that goes into the circulation element, for example. Same with vehicle miles traveled. It's a circulation element item, but it can translate into other elements. So we're looking at land use, for example, where are we putting these different uses, and how does that affect the VMT?
And I'm wondering, will we have like a broad overview too as to exactly why that's even important? And I know that there were some questions about like environmental justice. What exactly is that? And again, why is that important?
Yeah, so environmental justice is a relatively new element that the state's requiring, but it's basically ensuring that all members of the community have equal access and equal quality of environment for them. So it's making sure that you're not just putting the poor next to your industrial. Making sure that they're not at a safety risk just because it's cheap land, for example.
Because my background's nursing, so I do know that in public health, it is an issue that there is a higher rate of asthma, with families from lower socioeconomic status. And so it's just nice to kind of put those pieces together
Yes.
as to what exactly it is.
Yeah, so we'll go over and list out the requirements for environmental justice, and then those will be laid out for you during the next phase before any decisions or changes are made.
Is there a copy available online of this outline presentation?
There can be.
Yeah, I think it's a nice, quick summary, and it's going to outline two for us, so we need to watch for it.
As far as when individuals are going to come forth with a request for some kind of zone change or something like that. So the previous general plan, most of those came in to the general plan steering committee, which turned them over and made a recommendation. Others came later to the planning commission or something. At what point would people be able, and how would that work this time around?
Okay, so we are, any input can come in right now. Anyone can make a comment or give us their information. That would be wonderful. We'd love to hear from everybody. And then what we will do, once we've gathered all this information, we'll put together a report, and it'll list out what we found. And then that will be used in the next phase also, gaining more agency and community input. There will be workshops and hearings so that people can come and provide their input or ask questions. And it'll have each of the elements or topic areas, someone will be able to answer those questions.
Is it those green sheets that you have? Okay, so
Yes.
the ones that were in the back?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So those are available. Anyone can fill one out or email a comment. Like I said, we're looking forward to hearing from everybody, and especially your input when you deal with this frequently through your planning commission duties. I'm sure you've encountered things that you would like to see, so we'd like to hear from you.
So what happens when somebody turns in the green sheet? Then what happens with it? Do they talk to anybody, or they wait for a public hearing and don't get to talk to anybody ahead of time, or what?
Well, we'll compile all their comments, and then we'll also note who they are so that we can keep in contact with them and keep them updated as to whether there's a workshop coming up or any other event that they have the ability to provide their input.
Question for Andre. That kind of brushes up against some of our earlier discussions about commissioners and council members giving input into a process, and that's, is there an issue with that now?
There's no issue in providing comments into the process or participating in the hearings. So, really,
I know sometimes it's
open and inclusive that way. Now, that's not to say that 3 or more of you should get together on one side and
Right.
discuss coming forth with a position of the planning commission on how something should be changed.
but as individuals,
As
we're free
individuals,
to go.
you're as entitled as every other resident of Loomis
Does
and
it-
East Colorado.
does the same apply to the EIRs?
Provide public comments on PIR.
For us writing letters into the EIR?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Going back to RENA, do we include the ADUs as part of our meeting RENA numbers? Do you know?
Currently, they're assigned to the referendum properties, where the previous reallocation was 129. And even though you designate an area for that specific use, you can't make somebody build it. So right now, if those 129 units are not built on the site that we've designated, we have 90 days to reallocate a site that can handle that. at the October 8th council meeting. It's a joint session. That'll be a presentation both by HCD and SACOG on our new RENA numbers, which are probably around 180, 190. And they will be able to provide you their methodology on how they distributed that regionally and how our number went from 129 to 180, 190
That's total?
total.
I know the county's including the ADUs as part of meeting some of their RENA numbers. They went back and actually calculated that they now have like 300 that they can include in their total numbers.
And we're able to do that based on land use to determine, oh, well, this parcel, you've only built this much, you can build this much more. We can pull those ADUs out of that as they get built. That takes it off our total number. We just have to make sure, if it's affordable, low, very low, track those things that are being built. That's another thing that has to kind of be analyzed and determined is where we really are at. What has been built with those separate dwelling units and stuff and where they land to see it, make sure we've gotten credit for those. If we haven't, now's the time to take credit for them. Another part of the information gathering process and doing the cross your T's and dot your I's. And mainly because we found where, we updated the land use map, which is now on the website, and it calls out the specific use designations, land use designations, and things like that. And we encourage people to look at this, and if you see something that's like, what is wrong with that? We need to take a deeper dive into each parcel and make sure that it's zoned right. The parcels themselves are sized, GIS database, so we know, okay, there's one dwelling unit there, oh, there's two, and there's a garage, and so those end up being separate columns in that GIS database. And as we change land uses, if we change, let's say we move something from one place to another and the sizes are a little different, it will automatically recalculate all those things, so we don't have to. So making sure that the parcels are identified accurately at the beginning is the key to success in land.
Questions, comments from commissioners? Any staff questions, comments from staff? Okay, next, thank you. Next section will be opening up the public comment. Would anybody like to?
Can we make people first?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Miguel Yukovich. I live at 5911 Craig Court, Loomis, California. My first concern is to let the public know about this process. I think it's really important that you go out and do a real concerted effort to inform them what's happening. And I think to say, well, people can fill out a green sheet and send it in, you're not going to get many green sheets sent in. People don't know about this. When we did the general plan in whatever it was, 2002 or whatever, 2002, we had a couple meetings like over at the schools, and there were like 80 to 100 people that came and listened to the presentation about what a general plan change could be and what the people wanted. And some of you were involved in that process back then. And I think it's important that you really do a concerted effort with flyers or whatever and some public meetings so that the general public knows what is really happening. The other thing that wasn't, two things I want to mention. One, the park and recreation element is not an adopted element of the general plan. It's never been adopted. Yeah, it's never been adopted, as far as I know, right? So you might want to look at that. Well, we talked about it, but we never, as far as I remember. The other one, we're the only community in Placer County that doesn't have a sphere of influence. And I think it's important to get a sphere of influence so that not necessarily the town's going to move out and take all this property around us, but that property that's around us that might be beneficial to maintain our lifestyle isn't changed. And concern right now of the on the east side of Interstate 80 between Horseshoe Bar and King Road, most of that property is in the county, and I've been told that somebody is buying it all up. So if it's in the county and they decide to make it all commercial, then it could all be commercial and the town wouldn't get any benefit from that or be able to control that. So I think you really, like I say, we're the only town that doesn't have a sphere of influence. So I think you really need to look at that. The other thing you need to found out is that you need to get in touch with the water and sewer department companies, districts, because they're basically saying where your growth can go. As an example, there's a lot of property over on Saunders in that area over there. But if there's no sewers over there, then you're going to not be able to develop that. Do we need some development in Loomis? I believe we do. We need some more in the next 20 years to allow maybe a couple hundred or 300 new homes. It's quite apparent that people want to maintain the size of the lots basically of Sunrise Loomis. In other words, the quarter acre or so lots. And so in order to do that, you're going to need water and sewer. So I think you need to contact the water and sewer companies to see what their plans are. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so next, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Sonia Coupler, 5630 Tudor Way. So I picked up one of these green sheets, and I read at the top, consistency evaluation and information gathering, and then I can fill this out. And I didn't really understand what that meant, so I was reading through the steps, and I still don't really understand it. So I just was wondering if somebody could give kind of a basic explanation of what this is. Thank you.
So that sheet, we're so early on in the process of, what we're doing at this point in time is education, public education, commission education on the process that we're undertaking. There are several people that after a meeting like this will come up and say, oh, how do I change the zoning on my property? How do I do, that's what those green sheets are for. Say 10 years ago you heard something that was inconsistent, write that down on that sheet, provide that information back to us. That's part of that consistency analysis information we're looking for the public for. We go back through, we dive back down through minutes and read public comments on the last general plan update, and things get a little goofy, but we're really relying on the public direction and goals for the change of the community. So that's what those sheets are for. Tell us what even if it's, hey, I want to have a, I don't know, bounce house in Anchor Park, it's a wild idea. Who knows if it could ever happen, but those are the things we want to know. What do you want to see happen in your community? Where do you want to see it happen? Maybe you don't know that. But those are all things that then we go back and look at and go, hey, that's a good idea. Where can we fit that? And try to accomplish those public town goals. Did that answer your question okay? Yeah. Okay.
Can I mention about Town Talk? So I agree with Miguel about making sure that we're trying to get out into the community and meet people where they're at. And so at the library, we do have the Town Talks, and what we've been doing is actually kind of taking what Mary Beth has been doing and then, again, bringing it into the community. And so on Tuesday, we will have Charles Anderson, who's the legislative representative for the California League of Cities, and then is it Anders who's going to be doing land use. And so again, that's an opportunity where you can just kind of sit down and be able to, for me, process the information that I got here, and then be able to kind of do follow-up questions next week.
And to that, not only Town Talks, Leadership Loomis, all of these different venues, we're even going to reach out to maybe do a presentation with the women's groups, Seroptimus, League of Women Voters, Lions Club, community groups, to have those, you know, just go speak to them. Same kind of presentation. Get that word out. Get people more engaged in the process. You don't have to go to the Town of Loomis website to read what happened on the general plan. We're doing a complete reach out effort to the community and those service organizations. And repeating, I mean, you know, we owe it to our commission and our council to give them information and then share it with the public. This is our first public opportunity to provide information. What we provide here, then we take out and spread around.
So Meredith, is there going to be some mailers and media that's going to go out to everybody's mailbox to try to announce what's going on? And then if you have a schedule, whatever schedule we have, present that.
Yeah, once we get that schedule a little more refined in our information gathering, I would imagine in the spring, once we're kind of got our little ducks corralled, then we'll be able to start reaching out publicly and do flyers and things like that. Right now, we're still kind of in information gathering and dissemination.
Is this information in the newsletter that
Yes.
we just got?
Yes, and it will be in each follow-up episode of the newsletter as it comes out. We'll have an area where we're just updating you on what's going on, where it's at, when the meetings are going to be. Those up a calendar section in every one of those, that month by month what they're going to be doing. So as those get scheduled, those will become available for everyone to see.
Those are very, very nice.
Really like the newsletter. Yeah.
The benefit of doing these kind of presentations for you is that now they're being videotaped, they're online, you know, YouTube available. So if somebody says, dang, they start asking land use questions and why, we can then point them back to the presentation, you know, hey, sit and listen to this for 30 minutes, see if your questions get answered that way, and if not, let's continue your conversation. The same thing on zone changes. Okay, we get somebody that wants to, you know, change their land use designation. Okay, so we go back and kind of look and see and evaluate, and then we'll call them in and sit down and talk to them individually and work with them to reach their goals while, you know, still being able to function, so that you're not creating an island of commercial in the middle of residential ag. It's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. So, you know, to work with individual people in their individual scenarios, because the topic itself is huge. You know, when you look at 7 some miles of, you know, Loomis, it's like, ooh, and everybody's parcel has a little different something going on. So,
Is there online a usable map that people can actually call up and look at that they can make big enough to tell anything?
Yeah, this map is available on the city's website, on the planning department page. There's the zoning map and now the general plan land use map. PDFs, so you can blow them up, you can move them around, you can do all of that. I am going to have some of these printed big, like our zoning map for the wall in here for exercise purposes.
All right. Okay.
Are we likely to have like public workshops where people get a chance to, besides just talk to a hearing person, or, you know, a hearing where they get a chance to sit down at a table and work through anything?
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about even this early on is creating like our element, do a public workshop, open forum, say one table is land use, one is circulation, one is this. We'll have people manned at those stations. As people come around, they can talk to us about specific things related to traffic. Britt can handle the traffic, the engineering side of things. But yeah, and really create that buzz. When we do something like that, it'll probably be at the Blue Goose or, you know, a larger venue.
hopefully we get a good turnout. You know, if we need the school, we'll take it. But right now, I think we're so far in the beginning that we're not getting a whole lot of turnout, and you know. But as we dive a little deeper, I think we'll, you know, and the word gets out and people know, they're going to be there, and we're going to be hearing from them. So
There were good turnouts for things like the downtown area, the Blue Line, the Sacramento area, the Blue Line project.
Oh, the blueprints?
Blueprint,
Oh,
the
blueprint,
blueprint.
okay.
There was a really good turnout for that. There were good turnouts for things to do with the downtown, not Turtle Island, the village area.
okay.
There were
The
good
downtown
turnouts.
master plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we've talked about, you know, committees, at least having a committee that will help us in doing these kind of workshops and stuff. I see it being a council member, a planning commissioner, and some public people. And, you know, we're going to draw on them to help us and as reaching out in the community. So I do see those things coming, but not until the spring, maybe summer.
So right now, we're just kind of like laying down an educational foundation.
The foundation, yeah. And getting your minds geared up to, oh yeah, and you know, that's why we want to keep these going. We didn't have an action item on tonight's agenda, but you know, it's an opportunity to disseminate some additional information and kind of keep you posted on where we're going. So.
Any more discussion from anybody? Okay, and then moving on, would be next on the agenda is planning director's report, the implementation.
I handed, and at the front table, I distributed a monthly report. I kind of plagiarized from the town manager. He does that for the council, and I thought, well, you know, let's keep the planning commission abreast too, because not all of you guys are able to attend council meetings. So, little update on Costco, Civic Lab, pending projects. And if you want, I can go through these individually, or if you're okay just reading, you know, however you would like this.
That's a good idea, thank you.
Yeah. And, you know, we may not have an action item on the agenda, but, you know, you need to know that your staff is working and the things that we're accomplishing. So Civic Lab is coming to a close, which, you know, good or bad, I don't know, and I hope we're going to get some money out of it. It's been a year-long process. Our graduation at SACOG is October 31st. So, you know, they say good things about Civic Lab. This last week, we were down in Rancho Cordova, and we got to ride from year one. This is year 2 Civic Lab. Year 1, there was a project that actually was created by Rancho Cordova for an autonomous people mover, the Ollie, Ride Ollie. So it was there, and we actually got to get on and ride it. But that was created through the Civic Lab project to facilitate people with like parking areas and things, school campuses, things like that. And you know, it was really kind of cool. I was surprised though that it still took a person at the steering wheel and the brake just in case, you know, because you think fully autonomous, it's like, yeah, who is that guy? But, you know, so it's good to see those kind of projects when in inception, year 1, that actually in year 2 is out there and actually functioning. So it's free. You can download an app and take a little ride around the parking lot at Rancho Cordova. It's right across from City Hall. In the big complex there. So, pending projects, the Loomis garage is still, I mean, you know, it's approved. Their plans are in and being reviewed, or building permits, so that should start pretty soon. Star Liquor, Brian Nelson will be submitting his demo permit. I talked to him just the other day, so we should be seeing that happen, at least demolition of the existing building within the next month. His plan at this point for the replacement building, he actually is going up 2 stories. So he wants to have the banquet room, meeting room, and stuff like that up above with the rest of his facility downstairs. So that'll be interesting on Main Street to see a 2-story. It's like, yeah. Can you put affordable housing up there? No.
Okay, next item would be any comments from the commission for items not on the agenda. Okay.
I would like, I know that some of this on the housing is going to come in as part of the general plan, but there have been so many new housing laws. I would like to have us have a review of at least the major ones that are likely to impact us so that we have some idea of the kinds of things that we need to keep in mind for the general plan and just overall, so that we're not blindsided by something that we should have known or had an idea coming up that this particular, kind of law was even around. Because I know there were, 16 or 18 major ones done in early 2018 or something. I've seen a brochure on it, and I'm sure there are more since then, but we really don't have a lot of information. So I would like something specific on that.
So now that the
sometime.
legislative sessions come to an end, that's the sort of thing where we'll be working on providing you with further information, education about
Okay.
what actually passed and what that means for the town.
Thank you.
Okay, then before we adjourn, I thought I'd just review some of the important meetings that are coming up. October 1st, Town Talk, 6 p.m.
6 to 7:30.
6 to 7:30 at the Loomis Library. October 8th is our joint meeting with the Council and Planning Commission, and that meeting's at 6 p.m. And then October 22nd will be our next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting at 7 p.m.
And doesn't Sean's morning thing at the depot start in a few weeks?
Yeah, yesterday, Town Manager Tuesdays, the fourth Tuesday of every month from 9 a.m. to 10:30. You can come down, have a cup of coffee with him, talk to him about the weather or town matters, anything you have a question on.
Was that was today?
That was, yeah.
Today is Tuesday?
Today's the fourth
Tuesday. Yeah, I was thinking today was Wednesday. Maybe. Yeah, today was.
It's
So is
always,
that the first one? I think you
no,
did it
it's the
last night.
second one, and it's always on the same Tuesday as the planning commission.
Yeah, fourth Tuesday.
This is fourth Tuesday.
And that might be another place that people could come and informally talk to him about their general plan. I want to get this zoning or whatever, and he can find out a little bit more. Sometimes things they ask for are realistic, and sometimes they're just totally off the wall, and a little bit of education helps them to understand.
All right, thank you, everybody. Meeting's adjourned.
Good evening, sir. How are you? Okay. I think I asked him to take those stakes out. Oh, okay. Yeah. They do comment.